Drifting in the Endless Void is the sixth full-length album from Swedish stoner rock/metal band Dozer. And for many people, you'll hear them say that this is a foundational band for European stoner metal. Some people will go as far to say this is one of the more important founders of the subgenre. I don't. That's not at all true. There were bands that were around 10 years before that were doing quite a bit that we shouldn't overlook. But in terms of amplifying that style into its second generation, which did hit beyond a bit of mainstream recognition, this was one of the bands that people noticed on the tail end of Man's Ruins Comet, in terms of their first two records being well remembered as staples of the post-Kiss realm of stoner rock and metal as it transitioned from sort of underground movement into some more mainstream notoriety thanks to groups like Queens of the Stone Age. So, most people only know this band for their first two records, and you're really missing the plot. You're really missing out on their individuality by only knowing those first two records, because they were in debt to Kiss and Monster Magnet. Now, I think the important thing about this to know about this, if you're not familiar with the early '90s stoner rock and metal arena, and you don't really know the discography of a band like Monster Magnet beyond their more popular records, you're sort of missing an important bit of context as to why both this is important and why those are important and what this record sounds like, because there is still a bit of those sensibilities in their compositions here. Uh, that said, this record is very good. It's not just a little bit good. It's a very good record, and it's funny to think that it probably wouldn't have happened if the pandemic didn't happen. Uh, they put together this record basically because Greenleaf, the guitarist, and some other band and the drummers band went on hiatus during the pandemic because they couldn't tour, and that meant that writing this record was on the table. And it happened, and it happens to be great. They really worked out a fantastic set of songs that they're really not all that precious about their early sound. They're not trying to pander. They're just making something new. Now, that'll be obvious enough if you're already a fan and you haven't heard this record. So let's get to a song so you can just hear what Dozer sounds like now. So this is a lively, anthemic, energized band who sound more diverse, mature, and expressive than they ever have. And that works both in terms of seeing them as an alternative sort of stoner heavy rock band and seeing them as maybe the more aggressive side of stoner rock, while also just checking out the range available to the vocalist today. It's a bit surprising if you hadn't heard any of his projects that he picked up since about 2013. His range is a really big personality add, and we'd heard bits of that on maybe their third or fourth album, where his range had been they toyed with this sort of, not exactly a falsetto, but it's a different register that characterizes this album in a strong way, especially as it develops just general dynamic. I think '90s heavy rock and in general informs this record and the way that it is composed. And the heaviest weight upon this record is definitely shared in that mid '90s space, where their clear influences also match up with bands like Soundgarden. And I think that's an important note, is that you really feel the vocal performances reaching for that standard and a lot of the compositions reaching for that standard in their own way. This is still very much a Scandinavian stoner rock and metal band. So that's, they know exactly what they're doing, and it's weird that this record just shows up as this completely polished, pristine writing and very professional recording to the standard of more recent Greenleaf releases. So uh, it was kind of shocking. I expected this to be sort of a bumbling kind of nothing record that was just, it was there because it was time to come back. That wasn't true for Mammoth Volume, and it wasn't true for Lowrider. Those both bands both came back in a big way, and they felt like themselves. And Dozer feel like they've just been working on this for 15 years. It's a big transformation in a lot of ways. It realizes a lot of things that were barely there before. So, yes, this is rock music. This is again, I think anyone who grew up in the '90s would recognize the way that they write the dynamic of these songs. That they're written for detail, they're written meticulously, but their effect is anthemic, deliberate, and very memorable. Now, I don't think all the vocal performances worked for me on this record. I think the sleepier, Hopeless 13 that ends the album is just it's neither here nor there for me. But the full experience was impressive. As someone who's been a fan of their past works and kind of been touting the first three records for 20 years, I think that this is kind of more than I would have ever expected, and you know, it kind of blows me away that this record is as big as it is in terms of the sound, the writing. It all feels much more serious than it needed to be, much more present than it needed to be. And I wasn't expecting this band to go for it. So it was a very pleasant surprise. I was very happy with this record. So that does mean it does get kind of an unexpectedly high rating from me. And there's some justification for that in the review if you want to read the written version. And go check out the record tomorrow.